I'm really excited for this panel. It's an issue that I've been covering for a couple of years now and following. And just this week, we had probably the biggest, I guess, victory that I've seen in terms of attacks and thefts on individual cryptocurrency investors. And that's Michael's $76 million judgment that you won this week based on $24 million of cryptocurrency that was stolen from you in early 2018?
Correct, and it was 3 times damages because my lawyers basically looked and said, this is organized crime. So the person that we got the judgment against has not been formally charged with my crime yet, but he's in jail on 6 other SIM swaps. And when he went for a bail hearing, they said, well, we better not let him out because he's already been bragging on the phone that we seized about stealing my $24 million, so he'll be a flight risk. And we looked and said, we can take that to a civil jury, or sorry, to a civil judge, and you get a writ of attachment, which we literally got the day that we filed it. And then we got the judgment within 3 months. And there are more people involved, and there will be more suits that we will be filing similarly to, because again, with a RICO action against organized crime, it's like the mafia, they're all individually and severally responsible. And you can expect to see some filings next week.
Wow.
And then we expect also arrests to be happening in the next 2 months. In
the next 2 months, wow. And this all started, you're also suing AT&T because part of this started at an AT&T store.
If it wasn't for AT&T, none of this would happen. They are the absolute weak link. And that's because they show all their employees your password. I mean, all of you in the audience, imagine going into your bank and asking your teller, I forgot my PIN, can you give it to me? Look it up. They'd be able to go and withdraw money from your account. The phone industry is the only major industry that does not cover your password. And so what happens in virtually every one of these cases you read about is a gang finds what they call a plug, which is usually 18 or 19-year-old employee of one of the telephone companies and bribes them, usually $100 or so, for numbers. In fact, an equally important case that happened this week was the arrest of 9 people for the SIM swaps that happened during Consensus last year. Remember all the SIM swaps that happened during Consensus? 41 of them were a single bribe, series of bribes to one person in an AT&T store in Tucson, Arizona. And he just simply looked up, okay, we need these names, we know they're AT&T customers, switch them over to our phone, boom, 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 boom. All of a sudden, they get a $4,500 PayPal, and 41 phones go dead in the hands of the hackers. And hacking is like a bank robbery. You have a getaway car, you got a guy with a bag, you got a guy with a gun. So the role of the person in the store is to be bribed by one of the gang members, and then you have a whole room of hackers sitting around simultaneously asking for the SIM number that is now in the control of the hacker.
Wow. Speaking of this, what happened last year at Consensus, are there any people in the room who've experienced this, who've been hacked or been, had cryptocurrency stolen from them? Show of hands if you have. At least one person, okay. So yeah, this is clearly, I think it's fairly common. You've said even in the last couple of years,
yeah, the most amazing fact is 2 of us on the stage have both been SIM hacked through AT&T. So let me just tell you, if you're walking around, you're handing out your cards, you're telling people how successful you are in the crypto industry, and you're at conferences like this, trust me, there's going to be another batch of hacks that happen in the next week or 2. And some people in this room, at this conference, they're going to be the next batch of victims because the major telephone companies, AT&T still hasn't fixed their security breaches, T-Mobile, Verizon. While I don't represent Michael, I love what Michael has done and what his lawyers have done. I do represent over 30 other victims of the SIM hacking scandal from the last year or 2. And I can tell you that most people who get hacked more than once. So most people, I think Michael got hacked 2 or 3 times.
Twice.
Twice.
First time was so small that the law enforcement wouldn't even pay attention. It was half a Bitcoin when Bitcoin was like $1,000.
And most people, one of my clients literally got hacked, lost about a little over $1 million. Then while in the middle of the lawsuit, AT&T released his SIM card again in the middle of the lawsuit, just showing how much of a lax security protocol there is. Michael and I both have what's called enhanced security on our phones. The AT&T employees, if they are not actually just selling the passwords, they're simply bypassing the enhanced security. It's a tremendous problem in the industry and for everyone sitting in this room.
Yeah, let's put this in a little perspective though, because Dwayne, I know you came from the FTC, you're at a law practice now looking at some of the cases, but SIM swapping, it doesn't sound like it's a big part of what you do. I guess what are some of the bigger fraud scams that are more pressing?
Sure, so my perspective is from having recently come from the Federal Trade Commission, where I sort of led the blockchain and crypto enforcement. I came over into the private sector in November of last year. So I can't speak to those specific SIM swapping cases, but the kinds of things that the FTC has really been gearing up on enforcement are things like representations around potential investments, representations around returns from mining, and different sorts of malware that gets infected and then hijacks your phone to mine cryptocurrencies, those sorts of things. I think the broader takeaway from what we've seen on the federal side in terms of scam enforcement is that they are looking very closely at this, I think in part because there were some very high-profile issues surrounding ICOs. But I think it's important to realize that the sort of consumer protection and investor protection issues don't just end if you are or are not an ICO. So I think there's a lot of sort of regulatory action around, is my offering or my proposal going to be classified as a security and then subject to those laws? Well, even if it isn't and you run that gamut, there's still a backstop of all sorts of private sector and regulatory laws surrounding fraud or deception that you could run into. And it's important that those are on the regulator's radar, and it's the kinds of things they're looking for. And generally, if consumers are reporting that they're losing money, that's red flag, right? Like, that's going to cause an investigation. The second piece of this is, aside from just the scams, the focus on things like adequate sort of like data security and adequate protection of assets. Those are the kinds of things that the FTC really focuses on. Like, a lot of the actions they've taken over the last few years, including against some very high-profile companies, have been around not safeguarding data. And those are the kinds of sort of cases you could easily see having a natural fit with failing to safeguard some sorts of assets or tokens or something like that. It hasn't gone that way yet necessarily, but certainly the sort of precedent that's there in the consumer law is already there. And I think you're going to see a continuing focus on that. And again, it doesn't matter, this gets away from just sort of what regulatory framework am I going to be in, am I the CFTC or the SEC or whatever, to you're going to be subject to some sort of kind of consumer-focused law that if people get injured, people are going to find a way to name you in a lawsuit or provoke a government investigation.
Yeah. Michael, one of the things I found so interesting about your case, if you read through the documents, there's an incredible amount of detail, in terms of how it was stolen, what was used, but how much of the investigation was actually done by law enforcement or regulators, and how much did you have to personally do yourself or with lawyers or investigators that you hired?
Well, my first job after graduating from Syracuse was an investigative reporter. So, and I've actually helped the FBI solve a crime 20 years ago when I was founder and CEO of what's now Globe Newswire, was then called MarketWire after NASDAQ took over a partnership, but it was originally called Internet Wire, and it was the first internet-based press release distribution company. And we ended up having somebody go in and put a false press release out announcing that a public company right at the start of market, CEO resigned, CFO resigned. They had to restate their last 3 earnings from profit to a loss. The stock dropped from $4 billion to $1.5 billion in 15 minutes. And so all of a sudden, I get a call the next morning from all sorts of people, including Department of Justice, SEC, and the FBI put 20 people on it.
Wow.
And we actually cracked the case that day because they assumed that it was somebody who either worked for us, had worked for us, or a client, and they slipped up. Most criminals do slip up in one way or another. This was somebody who used to work on the night shift, knew that there was a way of hacking into the system by social engineering effectively, and kind of said, hey, this thing's broken and we can go and manually upload it. And instead of just cutting and pasting, he manually uploaded it through a Word doc. That Word doc had metadata that said El Camino College. That immediately got a list of suspects from 1,000 to like 5. And then one of those people worked on the night shift, and turned out that during the day, he bragged about being a day trader. And then we looked at his old machine and saw he was doing research on that stock, handed it over to the FBI and said, here's your guy. That was done in an hour. Mm-hmm. So with my case, I was able to, so again, there was a lot of misinformation at the time it was reported, like, oh gee, he should have protected his Coinbase account better. I don't have nor have ever had a Coinbase account. So all of my custodial exchanges, which I don't keep much on, I keep most of them in treasures and ledgers and hard wallets, were protected properly with Google 2FA and really long passwords that are kept in password protected files, you know, and the Google 2FA device is like not my normal phone. It's, you know, the best thing is you put it into like an Android tablet in a Faraday bag in a safe. But so, you know, basically what I got hacked from were actually native and staking wallets. These are things that you can't put on treasures and ledgers because they're not big enough tokens. And I got hacked the day of what they call the altcoin moon in early January of 2018, when that morning everything had green on it, double digits, and it was an $800 million market cap. So I felt really good until a couple days later that I realized that one of the 100+ tokens that I still had sitting there staking and this and that was gone. Because I looked at all my exchanges, I looked everything safe. I was like, okay, great. I didn't get away, I got away scot-free until all of a sudden I went to move some to sell it, and I saw that it was gone. And it was a very sophisticated criminal enterprise, basically, where they were able to go and get in and using third-party software, be able to get enough kind of, let's say, hints to be able to get into this staking wallet, the native wallet. And and so we spell out a lot of it in the 80-something page lawsuit, which is online. And but the main thing is that they would have never had access to fish around in different pieces. I mean, the first time I got hacked, they went into my DNS and they started trying to sell my domain names. And it took me a few days to realize that they had done that. Anything that has a reset, any Gmail account you've ever set up, anything, if they steal your phone, they steal your baby pictures, your passport, anything that has ever been on anything that can be reset with a SIM, which is why it's so critical to have this Data Protection Act passed. Again, Caitlin Long is going to be presenting it in front of Wyoming. I already have it in front of Puerto Rico, and I encourage anybody with any state to email me at michael@transform.pr, and I'll give you a copy. I'll post it on my blog of what it should look like. One state is all it takes to say you cannot sell phone services in this state unless you cover your password. And I don't think they're going to give up, even in Wyoming, a couple 100,000 customers. And once you have to change it, look, they're a phone company. Shouldn't be that hard to say, punch it in, instead of go and ask for someone to read it off the screen.
So it sounds like, I mean, when talking about your stock market example, I mean, that was something that you got a lot of support from the FBI or law enforcement right away. But for this, you actually were doing a lot of the legwork in terms of calling AT&T and figuring out what happened.
I did my own investigation because Secret Service, Homeland Security, they all will take information and say thank you very much. And I didn't have quite the same working relationship as I did 20 years ago. I think for whatever reasons they're not quite as cooperative. But I gave them a lot of information, and sometimes I'd be able to at least get them to confirm or deny what I knew. And the other thing is I got informants that started calling. They're like, hey, I know what happened. Can you give me a piece of the AT&T reward money or whatever? And I was just, what do you got? And so I got calls from the actual gang members themselves, friends of the gang members, people who think they knew stuff. Some was good information, some was bad information. And obviously, one of the pieces of information turned into a declaration. And that really, that along with tapes, audio tapes, of Nick actually confessing to the crime on audio tape, it kind of went a long way.
Yeah.
We have just as good information on a few other people that we're getting ready to have another RICO lawsuit against.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, there's a big difference in terms of, who you can go after, but also how much money that you can recover, that was stolen. And obviously it's not just the victims that want to get their money back, it's also lawyers who work basically on contingency, so you don't get paid unless the client gets paid, right? So, but I guess, how do you approach cases? Are there certain types of cases where you see as more recoverable than others?
So I jokingly say I have filed more cases in crypto than anyone in the country. It started off in 2014. I sued the first exchange, which was Cryptsy, which was located in Florida. Nowadays, I used to be able to do this easier. Coinbase, Kraken, I have class actions against BitConnect, OneCoin, Nano. There is going to be a slew of lawsuits in the next 6 months against every ICO that used the SAFT agreement. The question is, how do I view a case? I do only contingency fee work. So I get to choose who I sue. And when we're sitting here today, Michael and I are talking about AT&T is obviously a viable party. AT&T has said, we are 100% not responsible for what happens to your assets. They say, we look at the terms of service, we are not responsible. Every single exchange I have sued so far has said the same thing. We are not responsible whether or not you put assets here, whether or not you believe our advertising. If you go to our terms of service say, we have zero liability to you. Now, these cases have taken a long time. Coinbase has been going on for about 3 years. We went up to the Court of Appeals, we came back down. Discovery started after 3 years. These are expensive cases to prosecute, but when we first started, we took our shots. And when Bitcoin was trading at $250 a Bitcoin, a lot of it was whether any of these companies were going to be viable. Today, Coinbase, Kraken, they are viable companies with $5, $9, $10 billion valuations, depending who you believe. We are no longer concerned about collecting, we're concerned about doing what's right, both legally, ethically, and morally. And I get to say every single case I take, I have all three of those. I have the legal side, I have the ethical side, and the moral side. For some of the bigger class actions, and let's take BitConnect. I don't know if anyone in the room knows what BitConnect was, but essentially, BitConnect guaranteed you 40% return on investment monthly. Now, that's a really great rate of return if you can get it. Unfortunately, it's really hard to do that legally. Turns out to be a massive Ponzi scheme, exit scam, and they walked off with about $1.2 billion at an average raise of $10,000. We currently, the class action, I must have been contacted by over 10,000 people in the United States. We filed OneCoin this week, or actually I guess last week, OneCoin in New York. OneCoin at one point in time in 2016 was on paper worth $4 billion. Now there's $400 million locked up in that case by the government, so we're kind of excited by that. So there's some money to recover there. Some people are going to get their assets returned. Michael's doing a great job. He's already told you, he's going through suing the individuals, getting writs, hopefully going to be able to recover the crypto. But as everybody knows in this room, when you sue someone and you had your crypto stolen, one of the benefits of crypto is it moves pretty quickly, and once it's gone, it's gone. So recovering crypto, there's 2 Verizon cases in the SIM hacking where I was representing people, and in the SIM hacking cases, I have a clause because I'm working with the government, and I make no bones about that. If the government recovers your money and not me, you get to keep all your money. I've done all my legal work for free. Let the government do, if they do their job, you deserve all your money. But what's interesting is the Verizon cases, someone called me up at about 9:30 or 10 o'clock on a Friday night in Connecticut. I reported it to the investigators in California. We froze the accounts, and it's the only SIM swapping case I'm aware of where everyone that got hacked that day got their crypto back because the guy left it on a custodial exchange, which is pretty, not very smart for a hacker, but he's spending a lot of time in jail now, so.
Wow, that's great. In a minute, I'm going to take questions from the audience, so if you have questions, just line up at one of these 2 mics. But I'm curious, Dwayne, Michael was saying that he couldn't get them to return, he couldn't get the law enforcement to return his calls until he got hacked for more than 20 million. The small cases don't matter as much. I think for a while, regulators weren't even that interested in cryptocurrency thefts at all because they figure you own Bitcoin, you're gonna, it's a scam, whatever, you're gonna get hacked. But what is that view changing? Is there more interest in helping kind of the little consumers who get hacked for, a few Ether or whatever?
Well, I think.
Oh, sorry, Dwayne.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to hear this from Dwayne, just to give him a chance to.
So I think it is a good point that regulators, and I can't comment on any specific case, regulators have gotten more sophisticated about crypto in general. They have a better technical understanding, and they've gotten better at investigating it. So like the FTC did a workshop when I was still there last year that had the SEC, CFTC, Texas State Securities Board, FTC, a bunch of regulators talking about the strategies they employed to try to figure out who to go after. And there are a number of takeaways. One is there's just been a huge ramp up in enforcement there. Another one was, the guy from Texas talked about how he just looked at a bunch of ICOs, compared the white papers, and just like saw which language had been copied from other white papers as a way to sort of figure out who he was going to target, because those he thought were more likely to just be promising unreasonable things that were actually, in that case, security. So I think that that is something that regulators are focused more on, and the sort of takeaways in the next step is, I always said when I was at the FTC and still counsel folks now, is be careful what you're promising, right? There's extreme examples of like 40% rate of return. You're not going to get it. It could just be, be a scam. But I think there is a tendency to sometimes overhype or overpromise, or say like, if this token offering is going to do X for you, or separately, I'm an intermediary and I can do this value proposition for you with all the tokens you have. And in either case, what you're telling to consumers and what you're promising, you're going to be held to it if something goes wrong. And it seems like sort of basic advice, but I do think, especially if there's a hype cycle around a product, you can sometimes get into, I've seen companies get into trouble where their marketing efforts don't necessarily align with the value proposition that they can actually offer.
Yeah, all right. I see we've got a question here. Tell us your name too.
I'm Rachel. When you were explaining the AT&T and that someone lives, or someone that works there, sells the passwords, I had another friend have that happen as well. Could you just explain how that happens exactly? Is it because they're keeping exchange apps on their phone?
No. What happens is, so someone at AT&T, and there's hundreds of these people that we know of that are being investigated, and there have been a number of arrests. There are people who basically, they get targeted by the gangs on social media. They'll just see, oh, here's 1,000 people that work at AT&T, and they'll just email them from an account and say, yo, you want to make some money? And the ones that say, what are you talking about? And they'll then, give me an email or a telegram or whatever. And they'll privately say, I'm going to tell you who I need passwords for, and I'll give you $100 per password. You can make $5,000 a week. And if they say yes, there they go. And they might start them off with one or two to make sure that's for real. And then they've got them in their directory as quote unquote plugs. Every single employee sitting, getting paid $9 an hour in Tucson, Arizona, has the ability to go and read your password. And that's unbelievable. I didn't realize this until I found it out. I mean, I always thought that, when I gave a password or something, they would type it in or something like that and would open it up. No, it's just sitting there. And so what happens is that somebody who wants to hack you will go in and have a list of names, and they'll give it to one of their plugs. It doesn't have to be anywhere near New York. It can be in India. It can be in Cleveland. And they'll say, okay, at exactly this time, I want you to go in and type in that someone walked into the store with your ID, and it didn't scan properly, so I did a manual swipe or manual override. And at that point, he or she then turns off your phone. It goes dead, and he takes the SIM information, the subscriber information module, and ports it to a new phone of the criminal. And you can literally see this happening. This is what some of the subpoenas are to AT&T from React Task Force and everything else. I mean, you can literally see the signal going from wherever your phone was sitting in this room to the hacker in Philadelphia or Warsaw or Dublin. And that's when you know that it's been illegally moved. At that point then, that person has your digital life. They have the ability to make phone calls as you, but what they really do is they then sit in a chat room with all these other hackers who say, great, I'm now gonna go and try to break into their email. I'm gonna put in blah, blah, blah as a password, please reset email. It'll then send a text saying, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great, now I'm in, I'm gonna lock you out of your email. And they'll do every email that you have. They actually have hacker reverse lookup tools so that they know every Gmail account you've ever created with that phone number. They will lock you out of everything. That's what they do first. Then they go into those emails and see, oh, I got something from, MasterCard. I happen to know you have a MasterCard. I know you happen to have this bank account. Oh, great, you have a Coinbase account. We're gonna now go to Coinbase and say, forgot my password. And okay, we'll send you an SMS. If you have SMS instead of some higher form of authentication, You then go 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6, 7, 12, or whatever, and boom, they change the password, lock you out, they get all your Bitcoin.
And just to be clear on that, we call it the anatomy of a hack. They're doing that from the moment your number gets ported, within an hour and a half, they have gone through every major email account, every email account associated with GoDaddy, every email account that you have, and they have a list of main targets they're looking for, and it takes them less than 90 minutes to move. And the reason why they're targeting the crypto accounts, specifically within those 90 minutes, they are able to move all of your crypto, presuming you have limits on the higher accounts, which is why they love coming to places like Consensus, finding out names of people who claim to be ridiculously successful holding a lot of crypto.
I was offline for 10 minutes. They didn't get anything. They went back to the same person and said, we need more time. And so my wife said, wait, I just called this number. We just turned it off. Why is it back on again? And so we called again, and this time it took another half hour. So total time off was 40 minutes. They were able to go and get $24 million worth of altcoins.
And they've gotten a little bit better at this because now they're doing it, if you're on the East Coast, for instance, they SIM swap import your number at about 1:30 in the morning, Saturday morning. So there's 8 hours of time for them to go through all of your accounts. They've gotten quite good at what they're doing, and for lack of a better term, I'm on camera, AT&T is working with them.
Yeah. One more question, please.
So, in the cases of multiple swaps, does gross negligence get past the binding arbitration clause in the agreements of cell phones, AT&T and T-Mobile?
You got two guys on the stage here who are I'm the lawyer, he's the client, but he's taken a different approach, and he's in federal court right now fighting the good fight for a lot of people. All of my cases are presently in arbitration. You can read the lawsuits in arbitration are also online, but we're fighting it from two different angles at the moment, hopefully going to achieve the same results. But at the moment, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint are all claiming their terms of service are going to survive, and we're going to see it what a federal court judge rules and what a lot of arbitrators rule in the coming months.
My lawyer said the number one thing that's going to keep this out of court is the terms of service, but we think they're unconscionable, and we're going to put the entire AT&T contract on trial. And they blinked. They did not, in my case, I think they looked at my guy's track record, $5 billion of judgments, and having had some very precedent-setting victories, including he really overturned the whole Hollywood creative accounting system when he won the Coming to America case a couple decades ago. And they said, maybe this isn't the one that we want to go and try it out on. Let's try to go and win it in federal court and bring up stuff there. So we're going to court, and they're just going to, right now they switched law firms so that they went from, kind of the Street Fighter law firm to the Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, grind out paperwork and keep it, in motions as long as possible. So we were supposed to go in here. I filed in August, and after a lot of fruitless attempts to mediate, where they came back and said, after I spent $100 grand, just to have a federal judge come down and all the lawyers sit there and to hear their best offer, they said our best offer is $0. We just wanted to tell you why.
Right.
It's like, great, I could have saved $100
Maybe
grand.
I should ask a more direct question, because I put some research in this as well. And from my understanding, gross negligence will pierce the arbitration, because it's gross after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 attempts. I'm sure most of you all probably been, well, you probably know, but the people who've been hacked have been hacked 4 or 5 times. They're just only aware of it once or twice. So, do you agree with that? I'm asking counsel. Probably guess who I am.
I mean, the answer to your question is we are both presently fighting that exact question, but as the law currently stands, you're behind the 8 ball using that argument.
Okay.
But the difference being, when Michael's talking about unconscionability and that, one of the things your terms of service says for like AT&T, for instance, is you're entitled to twice your monthly cell phone bill as your damages. So there's something in there that says, what your damage limitations are. The negligence is not allowed pursuant to the terms of service. Their argument is that third parties' interference with securities is banned by the terms of service. So there are a variety of different arguments. I would say that we have some pretty egregious cases. Shit, I filed papers on Friday a couple of weeks ago, and they gave out my personal information when I got SIM swapped. They're leaking all over the place. So at the moment, no, they would tell you they have no responsibility and their terms of service are going to apply. I think Michael and I both believe that we're going to eventually be successful in our challenges to the terms of service.
It's going to be a 6-person jury that decides this in a federal court. And we feel, like you said, morally and legally, and we feel on, you know, I mean,
Morally, legally, ethically.
Ethically. I mean, their long contract that is a take it or leave it a contract where you don't get a phone, and all of their competitors have essentially the same contract, and you have to either sign it in the store or never get a copy and get it printed out in the store. You know, basically, they're asking you to indemnify them from their own fraud. Right. You know, that's just like unbelievable. I mean, no other industry has that.
Now, as a layperson, I'll walk off after this. Negligence and gross negligence are two different things. So the negligence is protected. Gross negligence, they can't contract that away, correct?
We have gross negligence, and I mean, I've been advised I probably should have said willful negligence because they knew it happened over and over again.
The language he's looking for is willful and wanton. Yes, we've all accused them of willful and wanton negligence and behavior. But again, look, I can't tell you how this is going to play out in the next year. Some of the carriers are stepping up and taking care of their clients. Some carriers are not. And you know, at the end of the day, you've got to be careful of who you do business with. And Michael and I will both tell you AT&T Enhanced Security isn't worth the money you pay for it. Other carriers are doing a little bit better.
I would suggest that anybody with an AT&T account switch it over immediately to anybody else. I mean, your best is to go something completely seamless like Google Fi. Your second best is T-Mobile has a service called Digits where you can take your current number, switch it over to T-Mobile. Don't have it be your main number though. Digits for $10 a month will make it SIM-less, so it can't be hacked. And then you have a new number that basically you put no data on whatsoever.
Okay, so that's some good advice to end on. I think, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.